Aaron Shelenberger, welcome back to Restitutio. So glad to have you on the show today to talk about resurrection.
Hello again, Sean.
How
Thanks
you
for having
doing?
me again.
Looks like you're growing out your beard a little bit.
Yeah, trying to be like you, man. Good looking and young, but not young, but good looking, maybe.
You're already so good looking.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, and your voice is even better looking.
Oh, okay. Better sounding, yeah.
Very blessed in the voice department, I think.
I
But
appreciate that, sir.
what you mentioned from last time? There might be some clarifications, some review. What would you like to go back to from last time, our last conversation together, before we get into today's topic?
Yeah, there's one thing that I've neglected to point out in our previous meeting regarding Ehrman's objection. As I've explained, his objection was the intrinsic improbability of miracles,
Yeah.
because historians can only establish what probably happened in the past. Miracles are extremely improbable, therefore, historians cannot establish miracles, right? Now, while Ehrman's objection fails because of the invalidity and the unsoundness of the argument, the resurrection that we have in this case is a non-supernatural resurrection, which can be reduced to a natural resurrection. Now, why is this? Because in my response, I've granted that we put aside whether or not God is involved in the picture. And for that reason, it simply would just be a non-supernatural resurrection. It is a resurrection, but it's non-supernatural, which can be reduced to what we may call a natural resurrection. Jesus was really dead, and he became alive somehow, based on the evidence. Assuming that we have lots and lots of good evidence, that type of resurrection can be, in principle, established. Now, I've mentioned to you before before we meet just now, that there was a almost all-day event,
Yes.
debate event between Mike Licona and Bart Ehrman this Saturday, April 9th, right? It started at 9:30, ended at 4:30 with some breaks in between, lunch and all. And it was a long debate. And one thing that I arrived at is the fact that I don't think any of the two won the debate, because the debate question was, did Jesus' resurrection really happen? Okay. Did the resurrection of Jesus really happen? Now, if you're a pro, you're going to say, yes, it did happen. It did really happen.
Yeah.
It really did happen. But if you're against it, then you would say, no, it didn't really happen, right? So Bart Ehrman at first was saying, well, it could not have happened because of the loss of nature. Pretty much, dead men don't become alive again. They stay dead. And then later on, he qualifies it by saying, well, one can establish the resurrection if we have amazing evidence, right? He used that term, amazing evidence.
Instead of extraordinary evidence.
Instead of saying extraordinary evidence, yeah. And so on the one hand, he says it cannot be established. And then on the other hand, he says, well, you can if there is any. But he doesn't really, in the final analysis, he doesn't really try to show that it did not really happen. That makes sense. So in his case only shows that we're just agnostic about it. That's the bottom line with Ehrman's position there. On the other hand, Mike Licona, to me, his position is reduced to non-supernatural or a natural resurrection, because he says that he's not assuming God, or he's putting God aside, right? He's just looking at the evidence, and
Yeah.
from what we have, the minimal facts, we are able to, not only in principle but also in practice, we're able to, at least he claims to have been able to establish the resurrection of Jesus. Now, to me, like I've said, this is actually a natural resurrection, not the biblical resurrection. Because the biblical resurrection is God raised Jesus from the dead.
Right.
And by the way, that brings me to an important point as biblical Unitarians. The biblical resurrection says that Jesus was raised by God. God raised Jesus from the dead. Okay, he didn't really rise by himself. He didn't make himself alive and become,
Right.
rise from the dead. So we have to make that that distinction. And I'm going to leave it at that, and I'll let you ask questions here at this point. Maybe.
Yeah. So this is an interesting category you bring up, the whole idea of a non-supernatural resurrection. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes. Yeah, simply because we're putting God aside in the picture.
Right.
Now, the reason we're doing it this way is because it's a methodological approach. Okay.
Right.
It's called methodological naturalism. It doesn't mean that we're denying God's existence. It doesn't mean we're atheists. Okay.
Yeah.
Methodologically, as an approach, as a method, we're putting God aside. So it is a non-supernatural resurrection.
Yeah. I would say that methodological naturalism is unnecessary as a tool. I don't think I would grant that as a starting place, because I think the farthest or the furthest that Mike Licona can get, or a minimal facts apologist can get, is to really confuse and befuddle the atheist with the excellent evidence for the historicity of the resurrection. But the atheist does not have in his, like, the closest the atheist has is an alien with superior technology. That's about as close as the atheist will come to being able to believe God raised Jesus from the dead. And I don't think we really want to argue for alien intervention, right, or some sort of technological explanation that is apart from God himself. So it is, I hear what you're saying. It is problematic to just grant the presuppositions. And that's kind of our topic for today, right? Aren't we discussing historiography as, the question of what is this term you have, or this phrase, the absolute inaccessibility to the supernatural? What are we talking about here?
Yeah, this is where this second challenge or objection that I critically analyze, Bart, okay? The absolute inaccessibility to the supernatural. Okay, let's see here. I'm sorry. Okay, so according to Ehrman, historians, qua historians, can only adjudicate historical claims and cannot adjudicate theological claims, right? Like the resurrection of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here I think Ehrman is partly right and partly wrong. He's partly right because the resurrection does have a theological aspect to it. Namely, God performed the act of bringing a dead man back to life. So therefore, historians, by the nature of their profession, do not have access to God or any supernatural power. Regardless of their religious or non-religious background, in the conventional historiography, historians apply what is called methodological naturalism. an approach that disallows any supernatural explanation in a historian's inquiry of any event claim. Methodological naturalism is not to be confused with metaphysical or ontological naturalism, which makes a bold claim that requires a justification that God does not exist and the natural world is all there is. Now, on the other hand, Ehrman is partly wrong because the resurrection does have a historical aspect to it, namely that Jesus' dead body physically returned back to life, an occurrence that purportedly had taken place within the space-time continuum on this earthly plane. Now, while historians do not have access to the actual event in question, and nobody does, by the way, they do have access to ancient texts and archaeology that may or may not have captured the purported event in question. Nevertheless, in my thesis, I propose that historians ought to abandon the conventional historiography, okay, and adopt what I call modified historiography. The conventional historiography limits historians from honestly investigating miraculous claims, while the latter, namely the modified historiography, would open up opportunities to learn more about the nature of reality. This modified fashion allows any supernatural power to be factored in a historian's historical inquiry. If there is enough evidence for the existence of a supernatural power and its involvement with humanity, and if professional historians are open to them, then there should not be any problem with adopting modified historiography. So if adopted, right, if historians adopt this modified historiography, then the door is swung open wide to establishing the resurrection of Jesus as an actual historical event. So I actually read some of the things that I have in my thesis. Mm-hmm. And let me pause there, Sean.
Yeah. I have a question for you. So I remember sitting in class with Paula Fredrickson. I took a class, I don't remember what it was called, but it was based on her From Jesus to Christ book or approach. And I remember she got to the lecture on miracles. And it was the most, she talked about resurrection and miracles. And it was the most uncomfortable I ever saw her. She was visibly irritated that she had, I don't know if I want to say irritated, but you know, it was frustrated to talk about this subject because of the overwhelming number of miracles involved with Jesus of Nazareth and her own historian's limitations to talk about anything supernatural at all. It does set up this sort of awkwardness. And I remember thinking, wow, she looks really uncomfortable. I don't know if she actually was. It just seemed that way to me as a student. And then I remember her saying, we can't accept the miracles of Jesus because if we do, then we have to accept the miracles of everyone in all of history. And I just wonder, Aaron, what would your response be to that? That, you know, methodologically, we have to exclude all miracles from his historiography, because if we do, then we have to accept any miraculous claims that anybody makes in the whole history of humanity. And what do you think about that as far as an objection?
Yeah, why not? We welcome miraculous events, even from other religions, because God is not just, you know, working through Christianity. He also somehow working through other religions, the religions that acknowledge his being a person, his being powerful, intelligent, you know, the creator and the sustainer of the universe. Why not? Mm-hmm. So yeah, we welcome them. The question is, are there enough evidence to show that such an event, a miraculous event, occurred?
Right.
That it boils down to that. The good thing is they acknowledge God, they acknowledge his power, his nature. Now the question boils down to evidence.
Right.
So
So,
I'd welcome any miraculous claim, even from the Muslims or Mormons
or what about ancient Greco-Roman biographies? Um, Sometimes they mention omens or miraculous events. Um, for those, you would want to have some sort of evidence other than just somebody's word, right?
right. Yeah, yeah.
So I guess, how is the evidence we have for Jesus different than, say, I don't know, Suetonius telling a story about a flock of birds that went in a direction, and that was an indication that they should go to battle. You know what I mean? Like, how is the quality of evidence for Christ? Why is that so compelling?
Well, it seems to me that the New Testament records, the Gospels and the Book of Acts and some parts of Paul's writings provide us a good information that gives us a good amount of confidence to believe that the resurrection of Jesus happened, and even some of the miraculous uh, actions he performed. Jesus walking on water, uh, the blind being able to see again, the lame being able to walk. As a matter of fact, even liberal scholars grant that the witnesses saw something that Jesus did. There were wonders.
Yeah.
Now, whether or not they're miracles, whether or not they're gods performing them, that's another question, because historians can't get into that stuff. But historians, liberal scholars, even acknowledge that, hey, we have enough data here that says there were people who recognized the wonders of Jesus, exorcisms and healings and even nature miracles, So in my opinion, we have enough evidence to see that, hey, what we have here is reliable and believable and acceptable.
Yeah.
And the believability and acceptability of all is heightened or raised by the fact that God exists, right? He had some prophecies in the Old Testament, and then we look at the religiously charged life, of Jesus. Then the probability of the resurrection and the rest of the miracles go up.
Yeah. Yeah, and you also have multiple witnesses for so much of this. I mean, not
Yes.
just the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and depending on what your assumptions are coming into them, you might look at them as Mark, Q, M, L, and John, and but regardless of that kind of question, we have multiple witnesses there.
Yeah.
We have statements in Paul that go back very early.
Yeah.
We have a number of extra biblical witnesses,
Sure.
at least to some statements about Christ, like Josephus, reconstructed
Right.
at least.
Not necessarily directly relating to the resurrection, but just the
Right.
movement,
Yeah.
the existence of Jesus, the movement
Right.
of the Christian faith,
So
the death of
it's not just one
James.
guy. Is my point. It's not just like
Right.
one guy's like, oh, this happened.
Yeah. It's not like what you mentioned, some ominous
Right.
occurrence
Right. It's
happening.
not just like, oh, I saw this unusual event or impossible thing happened, and like we
Yeah.
don't have access to that eyewitness to say, well, were you intoxicated? Did you eat some strange food? Was
Yeah.
anyone else there? Like these are the kinds of questions we would not want to ask somebody if they claimed that they saw, a pig fly, right? Which is
Yeah.
a miracle because pigs can't fly. So, when it comes to this whole subject, a lot of it comes down to defining what a miracle is. And what I
Right.
think is so awesome about the Christian worldview
Mm.
is that we are able to account for other miracles outside of our own faith.
Yes.
So we have three categories, just off the top of my head. Maybe there's more, but God. We believe
Mm.
God intervenes. God does things, and we
Sure.
call those miracles. Other miracles, we would say, are just bogus. They're claims that don't turn out to be true, or that we just don't have enough evidence on one way or
To
another
adjudicate
to
to
make.
yeah to adjudicate whether or not they
Yeah.
yeah.
And then a third category is demonic. And we
That
we
is so
do
true too.
believe,
That's
yeah, we
that's
do
another
believe
thing.
that there is a possibility for miracles to mislead people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we are very open from a worldview. Our presuppositions are very open to any evidence for or against any alleged miracle. And I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that positions us much better than the atheist or the agnostic who just says, I can't believe any of that. It positions us better to weigh evidence,
Right.
don't you
Right.
think?
Yeah. A couple of things. One is you mentioned atheist, agnostic. Already in their minds, they're already presupposing God's non-existence or questionable existence, right?
Yeah.
So because of that, they're already biased against miracles. You know, miracles could be God performed or some demonic power performing it. So now the other thing I want to point out too, Sean, is that I believe that I'd like to echo what Lydia and Tim McGrew and company are advancing. We need to get away from quoting liberal scholars. I know I did that a little bit, but I did that just to point out that even liberal scholars acknowledge it. That's all it is. I'm not trying to say, well, because they said it, therefore
Yeah.
it's true. No, I'm just saying even they are acknowledging that some of the things said about Jesus is true. It sort of debunks the idea of the mythicists and all that, all those crowd there.
Yeah.
Now, we do need to get away from trying to appeal to liberal scholarship. We're not at their mercy seat. We need to carve our own investigation. And Lydia McGrew had been able. I'm looking for the books right now. Looking around here, yeah, she has a number of books already put out in the past 2 or 3 years, right? And I'd recommend these books to everyone. One I have here is Hidden in View. Okay, Hidden in Plain View. Another one is the mirror or the mask.
Mm-hmm.
Real thick book. And then I have one here, which is the recent one, The Eye of the Beholder. This is about the reliability of the Gospel of John. And this is very thick too. And I have a lot of stuff to read there. And I'd encourage everybody to look into her work. And we need to start, like I've said, contributing to this, carving out our own investigation and presentation and case for the reliability of the New Testament in support of the resurrection of Jesus and other things said about Jesus, and move away a little bit from the minimal facts, work towards the maximal facts approach.
Okay. Let's talk about methodological naturalism for a minute.
Okay.
If you were having a conversation with a historian of Ehrman's ilk,
Sure.
and you perceived that this person was already aware of the typical Christian minimal facts approach, and you wanted to challenge the historian's presupposition and make a case for what you're calling here modified historiography. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, modified historiography. How would you go about having that conversation to bring a change about in someone's mind about the necessity of methodological naturalism?
Well, first of all, I would acknowledge the fact that there is a place for the conventional historiography that historians employ. Now, conventional historiography entails a method called methodological naturalism. And it's just a method, putting aside any supernatural explanation or power. We just look at what we have here, what happened in the past. And by the way, for Bart Ehrman, the past is not similar to history. The past is something much, much bigger. Okay. History is what we can recover. Okay. And be able to, write about and, capture and write about. Now, the practice of the conventional historiography entails, like I've said, a methodological naturalism, because majority of historians don't really agree that God exists, and because of that, so they're constrained. It's a methodological constraint. They somehow decided to say, well, let's go ahead and put aside God. Let's just focus, regardless what our belief or non-belief. Whether we're Christians, Muslims, Buddhists are actually atheists. But whether we're Jewish, doesn't matter. Atheist, agnostic, we're going to put aside the question about God, right? So we acknowledge that. Okay. Now, when we look at the resurrection has to do with our existential status. It claims to be performed by God, right?
Mm-hmm.
It claims that through this, God can make us immortal. Now, when we discuss these things, we get into the ultimate nature of reality. So unfortunately, conventional historiography, through the use of methodological naturalism, it has limits. It does not get into the question of ultimate reality. Okay, so I would submit that to historians. Hey, because conventional historiography is so limiting, we need to modify it. Aren't we all after the truth about ultimate reality?
Mm.
The
Well, now what if
resurrection
they?
claims to be a historical event that's performed by God. Okay, so why not modify our approach, and why not incorporate God in the picture? Now, whether or not what kind of God and all that, of course we can debate that, but let's go ahead and start doing that. I'd like to encourage you to start getting into, because aren't we all about truth? Historical truths could be linked to ultimate reality.
Yeah. And what if they just said to you, well, Aaron, that's not the way history works, and you're trying to do philosophy, and I'm not a philosopher? What would you, how would you reply back?
Well, we have to realize that history has an underlying philosophy in itself too. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
History, or doing history, assumes certain things are in place. It assumes logic. It assumes that reasoning is a reliable
That's true.
tool. It assumes that the past really happened. It's historical realism. They call that. Philosophically, you have to have that already in place before you even do historiography. Okay. It assumes that historians are able to reach back and sort through all the data. Okay. Archaeology, texts, testimonies, and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
It assumes all of that. That's philosophy. Okay. So if you're saying, well, that's, you're being philosophical, of course I am being philosophical. Yeah. But you're being philosophical too when you try to do history.
Yeah.
Historiography is replete and is full of philosophy. So So I'd like to suggest, you may not, if we have enough number of historians, who are willing to look into this, why not?
Yeah.
Because right now, majority of historians decide, hey, we're going to put aside God. Okay, we're not going to discuss. Okay, what if someday, if we have enough evidence, if there's enough discussion, then we can go ahead and move towards the modified historiography that I'm proposing.
Yeah.
Namely, let's go ahead and start allowing God in the picture.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly do appreciate a lot of the gains of modernism and the Enlightenment over against superstition, and uh, certainly pre-modernism and its sort of blind either acceptance or rejection of authority. Yeah, there's a lot in modernism that I appreciate, especially how it relates to science and technology, engineering, and the many benefits that this way of thinking has brought into our world. But I don't think it's adequate to deal with people. And
Okay.
the history of people is not really something that the presuppositions of the Enlightenment can handle very well.
Yeah.
The economists and the sociologists, they can develop models on how they think based on incentives and, given various initial conditions, how a village or group will react in a situation.
Yeah.
But there's like almost no predictive reliability. And history just seems like one-off event after another one-off event. And
Right.
many of them do make sense within their context, but then there are other events where you're just like, wow, I didn't see that one coming.
You
um,
know,
and that's just the sort of the nature of it. So I think we have to move beyond modernism and embrace a more open-minded approach to
yeah.
doing
Yeah.
history. And typically, when we Christians talk about postmodernism, we're looking down our noses at it, saying,
Yeah.
"Oh, this is such a terrible thing." And in many ways, postmodernism is terrible. But there are some, you're not going to have a movement if it has no validity to it.
Right.
There's always
Right.
going to be a kernel of truth, a kernel of
Sure.
goodness, or
Sure.
a
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
legitimate rebuke of an insufficiency in the previous movement. And modernism applied to, in the 20th century, to nation states and militaries, landed us in all kinds of killing each other.
Yeah.
And it didn't produce the paradise that it promised. So I think when it comes to a bit rambling here, sorry, Aaron,
That's fine.
but
That's fine.
when it comes to doing
Yeah.
history,
That's
I
good.
don't think we can just privilege the modernist worldview that we've inherited from a couple hundred years ago and say, well, this is infallible and we can't question it, and we have to presume naturalism at the outset. I think it's just kind of naive at this point in the game,
Yeah.
at this point in the 21st century, to say, oh, well, this is clearly the best and only way to do history.
Some of that I believe is you have enough influencers, philosophers of history and even historians themselves who are atheists and agnostic, and their world view pushes them for this to advance or to keep this conventional historiography of entailing methodological naturalism. So in the back of their mind, that's really what they want. They have that agenda. They're pushing it. You don't see it. They won't admit it.
Mm-hmm.
They would mask themselves with, oh, we just don't want to allow God. God can do whatever he wants. We just don't have enough people
We just
believing in
don't have
God. Therefore, we're going
access
to
to
put him
God.
aside. Well, in
Yeah.
that case, okay, let's go ahead and discuss God.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and argue it. Let's debate it.
Well, what would you say would be your top reasons for that you would present to somebody like that to believe in God?
Well, you have to realize too that historians, like I've said earlier, they're not all atheists. Probably the majority of them are theists.
Right.
Hey, first let me gather or rally the support of all theists.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah,
Let's
I'm sure you're right
let's
about that. Yeah.
yeah let's hey, whether you're Muslim, Christian, you know, Jewish, historian, let's go ahead and come up with ways to convince our atheist agnostic friends. Now, if they don't want to be a part of it, fine. Let's go ahead and start our own movement, pushing for this modified historiography that I'm proposing. And okay, then I don't know how to even convince an atheist or agnostic historian to even allow supernaturalism. I don't know how to do that, to be honest. But at least, if I can garner enough support from other theist historians, perhaps, we can start the movement. And I believe that there is a movement like that already happening in the past decade or two. There is this publication, Theory and History. I'm not sure if you've heard of that.
No, I haven't.
You have a number of philosophers of history contributing to that publication, Theory and History. I think that's the name of that academic publication. So there is a movement happening. And have you heard of a guy named Avizar Tucker, who is a philosopher of history? Okay.
No.
Yeah, he's one of those people that are, to my recollection, he's for allowing God in the picture, or some kind of supernatural. It doesn't have to be the Christian God or the Muslim God or the Unitarian God, just some kind of power. There is a power out there that's injecting its or his power into our system, and we have to allow that.
You're arguing for an open system,
right? Pretty much,
as opposed to a closed system. Yeah.
Because methodological naturalism assumes a closed system.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is a very narrow perspective on the way the world actually is. And it's not provable. It's a presupposition.
Yeah.
It says if we can't reproduce it in a test tube or measure it with scientific equipment, then we're just going to exclude it from investigation. And you can't prove naturalism using naturalism. It's a presupposition. And so the question is it a valid presupposition or an invalid presupposition? And for that, we, as you pointed out, we have to turn to philosophy. We have to ask the questions about God's existence, or however you want to word that. I think, we have really compelling evidence from the cosmological argument, cause and effect. If the universe had a beginning, it needs a cause of its beginning. I think we have good, strong inferential evidence from intelligent design, especially if we look at DNA. And we say, well, DNA is a code, it's a language. All languages come from a mind. Well,
the anthropic principle underlying
can languages generate themselves? Does that make, how would that even possibly work for a language to generate itself?
But also from, assuming that evolution is true, okay, I don't really grant it, but assuming that that's true, how is it possible non-life begat life? Right. How is it possible that non-rationality beget rationality?
Yeah.
There has to be an intelligent, independent mind that made that happen, made those things happen.
Yeah. Then we've got the fine-tuning of the constants in the physical universe for life.
Yeah.
We also have many firsthand claims to miraculous events.
Yeah.
And that's not so easily dismissed.
Yes.
It's quite a burden, in fact. I mean, there are, I don't remember what the statistic was, but 60% or something of Americans claim to have seen a miracle in their lives.
Yeah.
If you go to, and this is a fairly it depends on where you live. I live in the heartland of secularism within America, but there are other countries that are much more religious than America, and that would have much higher
Africa
percentages.
and Asia,
Yeah,
you have a lot more religious people there too.
Yeah, so on a Christian worldview, we don't have a problem with, say, like an African witch doctor claiming a miracle and having like lots of eyewitnesses. We don't have a problem with that. We can say, well, either it's God or it's demonic or it's a trick. It's a superstitious trick. We can do that. The atheist only has one move. It's a trick. It can't be legitimate. It can't really be what it, on its surface, prima facie, claims to be.
Yeah.
And they have to do that every single occurrence of everyone that claims, not only in the world today, but throughout time. I mean, the burden of that is just immense.
Yeah.
And even if just one miracle happens, a verifiable supernatural event happens, it disproves atheism. So I think there's just a lot of compelling reasons to believe in God's existence, not to mention my own personal testimony, your testimony, the testimony of other people like Louis Zamperini. Have you ever heard of him? He was the Olympian during World War II. They made the movie about him called Unbroken. And at the end of that book, not in the movie, but in the book, they talk about how he went forward at a Billy Graham crusade in California.
Yeah.
And he had been tortured with post-traumatic stress disorder. Not that they called it that back in the 1940s and 50s. I think they called it shell shock back then. But he had these nightmares over and over and over. And he was just heavily sedating himself with alcohol and just really destroying his life. And he had this unusual experience in this tent meeting with Billy Graham where he went forward and got prayed for. And in a moment, he was completely healed of the torment of these flashbacks. And he lived another 50 years afterwards. They never came back. He lived well into, I don't know if his 80s or 90s, and dedicated his life to serving God and working with troubled youth. You have stories like that, and it's like, well, what do you do with them? Are we going to say there's purely psychological explanation,
or even scientific?
For him?
Some atheists would want to say that, well, there are some things that we have yet to discover, and that cannot be explained by current modern medicine, or
that's we call that a science of the gaps theory.
Yes. Science of the gaps. Or naturalism of the gaps.
So we'll figure that out later.
So
give us another 1,000 years.
That's just you being closed-minded, and you just stubborn to be open to the possibility. You don't even allow the possibility that it could have been God. Oh no, I allow the possibility. No, you don't. You don't really allow it, to be honest. In your heart of hearts, because if you are, then you won't make any of these excuses.
Yeah. Do you remember the New Atheist Movement?
Yeah, Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens.
And
there's another
Dennett.
guy, William
Daniel
Dennett. Daniel Dennett. Yeah,
the four horsemen. Well, and Shermer almost got up in there, but he kind of got left out from the celebrity. Yeah, from the celebrity status. But I remember, boy, when was the heyday of that movement? 20 years ago or so. They were really ramping up, and they were buying ads.
A lot of Christians were losing their faith, and
Christians were like, "Oh my gosh, it's the end of the world!" And they were buying these ads on the double-decker buses in England and London, and they're like, "Well, there's no God. Be good for goodness sake," or whatever. And everyone was just convinced that this was the greatest threat to face Christianity. And as it turns out, I believe, and I think a lot of sociologists would back me up on this, that the new atheists were in fact the death throes of modernism, and that they were just sort of like the last, convulsions of a body that's just about to die and has just a little bit left in it of energy.
Yeah.
And these, you just, I mean, you don't hear much about any of these guys anymore. I mean, yeah, sure, Sam Harris is still out there writing books against Christianity, and Richard Dawkins.
But he's not promoting atheism anymore. Who's
big
doing
now? It's
something
Jordan
else.
Peterson and these other thinkers that are just like, you know what, maybe there is a God.
Right.
And they don't have that hard edge to them like
Yes.
the new atheists used to have.
And even a lot of atheist philosophers, I mean, who know what they're doing, who know what they're talking about, are embarrassed by the arguments advanced by these four horsemen. They distance themselves from these people when it's embarrassing. And when Richard Dawkins and company came out, they never really impressed me, and some of the things that they were putting out were shallow. Now, let me say something here, and I want to be careful. I know there are some people here who were Ravi Zacharias fan. To me, when I first heard Ravi in my, when I first got into apologetics some 15 years ago, 20 years ago, he never impressed me. And I kind of put him in the level of Richard Dawkins. He's got all these slogans about God. Okay,
he was a good public speaker.
Yeah, he was Richard Dawkins. He was very popular because he was very persuasive, and he put things in simple terms. And everybody's all, he's all that. Similar to Ravi. He's with that British or Indian accent he had, and he never debated. You know that, right?
No, I never really followed his.
He just had a one-on-one debate on stage with some students, like 2 or 3 minutes. That was it. There was no 2 hours, 3 hours. No, nothing like that. I think he would have been destroyed. Yeah.
Well, anyway, slogans sound really great when you're making a speech, but in a debate, you have to think on your feet, and you really are challenged with the counter idea. So it is a totally different kind of thing. Yeah, I think Ravi probably did some good in the world, but considering the fact that he was, adulterous and committing adultery, and I think also he was found to be embezzling funds from the organization.
Right.
I don't think he serves as a very good example to any of us.
Yeah.
And that's tragic.
I only
that's
mentioned
tragic.
him,
but I do
just
hear
to
what
say,
you're saying. Yeah, he's kind of at that level, kind of like the junior squad, not the senior team, the varsity team. But my point about the new atheists is that it was like a big tidal wave, and many of us in ministry at the time were so nervous about it. And now that tidal wave has washed over us, it has come ashore, and now is pulling back into the ocean. And what we're seeing now is people coming back into churches who are now disillusioned with Sam Harris, and they're thinking, I thought he had all the answers. I thought he was so smart, but now I'm just not so sure anymore. I'm not so confident that my fundamentalist atheism is the only true religion.
Right.
And
that's why.
So that's a fascinating time we're in.
When you ask them, when you press them for answers, they're not really atheists. They're agnostics.
Yeah.
So you hear some of these atheists are claiming to be atheist agnostic. Well, I don't really, atheism is simply a lack of belief in God. It's not a worldview dependent. We don't have a worldview about God. It's just like, we just don't believe in unicorns. We lack belief in unicorns. So they try to excuse themselves from making arguments for the non-existence of God. So they're saying, well, I'm an atheist, not because I have to disprove God's existence. It's because there's not enough evidence. That's what they say. There is a growing movement to that end.
Yeah.
You hear Matt Dillahunty and a bunch of other atheists are saying that, to try to say that, well, it's not my burden to show that God doesn't exist. It's your burden to show that God doesn't exist. But the classical meaning of atheism is belief in non-existence of God,
Right.
which is a positive claim. You
Right.
positively believe that God doesn't exist.
Yeah. Yeah, I see. Well, we're just kind of winding down here, Aaron. What else on this historicity of the resurrection and these different claims? Maybe we could summarize a little bit. Well, let me ask you first. Did you want to say anything else about this accessibility subject?
Yeah. Okay.
Then we can summarize.
I do agree with Ehrman that the only way, given methodological naturalism, okay, as a method, the only way that we can prove or show that Jesus became alive again is if we allow God in the picture, because the evidence is not enough, right? And therefore we have to allow God in the picture. But the problem, he says, well, God is not allowed in the picture because of the methodological constraints. So I'm proposing, well, in that case, let's go ahead and modify our approach. I call it modified historiography, and we I believe must move towards that, because we're after truth, right? Could it be, and I believe that historical truths are on par with ultimate realities? When we say, well, the resurrection didn't happen, there's not enough evidence, and we can't allow God, well, could it be that you're preventing God in the picture, and you're disallowing people to know the truth about ultimate reality? Ultimate reality includes historical realities, historical truths. Therefore, you're limiting research. You're not really about progress. Contrary to what you claim, you're not really open-minded. So hence I'm proposing this modified historiography.
Yeah.
And how is that going to happen anytime soon? Maybe not, because
I think it will.
well, anytime soon, maybe it will, maybe not. I don't know.
I mean, it's just my gut, my intuition, but yeah, I definitely see this happening within our lifetimes in the academy. Because I mean,
I hope so. I pray so.
The other way of doing things is just, from where we sit now, it just looks so
Unlikely.
like 19th century. You know what I mean? And
yeah.
Like, why do I feel that way? Why do so many others feel that way? Well, the culture has shifted.
Okay.
And I think that there are going to be some people that are, what we've seen, for example, with Jordan Peterson is the salvaging of the mythical approach, of the liberal New Testament scholars of yesteryear, where they're just like, oh, well, no, the Bible's good. We just have to realize there's just a bunch of myths that have moral lessons to teach us.
Yeah.
So it's almost like we're kind of moving backwards a little bit. And, I don't think this hard and fast methodological naturalism is going to hold much longer. I mean, I don't really know, but that's my gut.
Yeah.
We'll have to wait and see,
Yeah. Another thing in closing I'd like to say is emphasize the fact that we do need to carve our own investigation of, the New Testament data, the historical facts, me recommending Lydia McGrew's writings, and I'm sure there are other writings out there to that end. And we have to do our homework. We can't just be passive about it. And another thing, yes, we are biblical Unitarians. I believe that one way to reach out to the Trinitarians is not to constantly debate about the Trinity or the deity of Jesus. We have to be allied, become allies, towards advancing the resurrection of Jesus, advancing morality. Let's be allies on some things, rather than constantly debating them about, the nature of God as whether he's a Trinity or not, or yes, there is a place for that, but let's become friends and let's, if that makes sense, that'd be my closing there, Sean.
Yeah, I appreciate that sentiment there. A lot of times, whether or not we can be friends with Trinitarians is really up to the Trinitarian, much less up to our side. But I think it is very helpful to engage and to not just do negative work, but also do positive work. And I really appreciate you mentioning that. We don't want to be we don't want to have our churches be the kinds of places where all you hear is what we're not.
Right.
And I don't think it's really like that in churches, in fellowships, house churches, but it is like that online.
Right.
Because that is our advocacy a lot of times is that we're trying to win converts, persuade people, and also justify our existence when we are constantly discriminated against. I mean, it's really a lot.
Yeah.
So my heart would be that when it comes to actual local communities of biblical Unitarians, that they would be holistic and not just stuck on this one subject, just like you said.
Yeah. And incidentally, there is a debate review of the recent debate between Licona and Ehrman by 4 gentlemen, 2 atheists and 2 Christians. And these Christians are Trinitarian, right? They're very popular. David Wood and a gentleman named, I forget the name, he's with the Inspiring Philosophy.
Okay.
The other 2, the atheist is with Myth Vision named Derek. And the other guy is an ex-Muslim who's now an atheist. I think he is an apostate prophet or something like that, right?
Oh, wow.
So anyway, they together did a review of the debate.
Yeah.
It was a friendly discussion, but you will never hear Trinitarians trying to collaborate with Unitarian. When it comes to Unitarian, oh no, we can't. But when it comes to atheists, it's different.
Yeah.
They hug atheists, with all their might, but they shy away like plagues from Unitarians. And
well, I can't say that I know how to fix that, but I do kind of understand it. I think there is just an incredible fear. An evangelical knows what to do with a liberal Christian.
Yes.
Or ironically, most liberal Christians believe in the Trinity and delight in the mystery of it. But if you are, say, like a Unitarian Universalist liberal Christian, then an evangelical knows what to do with you. They say, well, you are part really of a different religion, or some of these more liberal mainline denominations. They're like, you guys, we put you in a box over here. You don't accept the authority of Scripture, so therefore you're in a different category. The real fear and confusion and, I believe, animosity towards us comes in because we're saying to them, no, we agree with you about Scripture.
On everything except.
And it's because we agree with you on Scripture that we disbelieve in the Trinity, because we don't find it in Scripture. And as a model, as an explanatory model of God's inner being, we don't think it works with Scripture or reason or history. All 3 fail. And we are genuine followers of Jesus who accept the same Bible as you. That is terrifying. We're the contrary witness in the room that is raising our hand and saying, Yeah, I saw this person kill the other person. Like I was there, I saw it. They
Yeah,
have to get rid of us. So I think I kind of understand why there is such such a bulldogishness
yeah, yeah.
against us. But you know what? From the example of Jesus, I don't see that as justification for us being that way back.
Right.
I think that
Amen.
we are taught to love our enemies
Yeah,
and to pray for them, and that if we do get slandered because of standing for the real Jesus,
yeah,
that he says to leap for joy, because that's the way they treated the prophets. Jesus' persecution didn't come from the Romans very much. I mean, at the end, of course, but most of it
from
was
religious
from the
people.
established religious leaders who believed in the
Right.
same Bible as he did.
Yeah, yeah.
So I
Hmm.
think that's where we're at today. But I
Yeah,
really appreciate your time, Aaron. Thanks so much for
yeah.
presenting this research, and we'll be certain to have it available to people to read the entire paper. What's next for you? Do you have any idea about future projects that you're working on, or anything you'd like to promote?
Yeah, I'd like to continue to work on fine-tuning the content of my thesis, and some things I'm changing. And after the changes, I'll send you a PDF file so you can upload
Okay.
it for others be able to view it. And in my YouTube, I'm slowly putting together a project, what I call grounding, building, and developing one's religious epistemology. So, we have foundationalism. What do we assume? Logic, reason,
Hmm.
the existence of other minds. You know,
Hmm.
and then from there we get into the type of apologetics. Are we classical apologetics or presuppositionalists or
Hmm.
evidentialists? Well, I am trained as a classical apologist,
Okay.
from my seminary. That is to say, when we defend uh, Christianity, we are using what's called a two-step apologetics. One, we got to establish God first. God has to be there first.
Hmm.
Because number one, he's the foundation. He's the
Yeah.
ground of being, right?
Yeah, that's a
And
message
then
that's
we get
coming through
into,
clearly. That is very important to you, and I appreciate you bringing that up.
yeah, exactly. So, and then we get into Christianity, okay? You know, the resurrection of Jesus, his ministry, his second coming. And, you know, so I believe that the best way to do apologetics is by applying classical apologetics. So I'm building, I'm grounding it, and then building it and the process, and then developing it later on.
Hmm.
Hopefully I'll be able to invite Dale Tuggy. I've already invited, Dustin Smith, and, as far as the Bible, and, invite other speakers. I might invite Trinitarians too, so don't be offended, listeners, because they can contribute to the grounding. They don't need to be Unitarians to be able to contribute to the grounding, the Christian apologetics, the
Yeah.
classical Christian
Well, yeah. I
apologetics.
mean, when it comes to epistemology, you've got a lot in common there,
Right, right.
and
Yeah.
this is a subject that's worth consideration, and it's important, both for apologetics and also grounding our own confidence,
Yes.
that
Yeah.
these are not cleverly devised tales told, passed down generation by generation, but that they're if you go all the way down, there's solid ground somewhere, and then you
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
build back up using first
Yeah.
principles. I think that's a great project, and I'd love to see a book or something, over time, if you
By
could
the way, I'll
develop.
invite you too. Now, when eventually we're going to get into, the nature of sin, the nature of man.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that'd be
I've
good.
been doing work on that a little bit, and I've enjoyed that.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Aaron, for talking with me today. I appreciate it.
All right, Sean. I enjoyed it very, very much. God bless.
God bless.